Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and start recording so that we can get started. I'm gonna start today where I ended the lecture on Monday, which is the War of 1812. Um, your book doesn't really go into any like key specifics really about the War of 1812. They kind of just gloss right through it. They spend a lot of time on the buildup. They don't really spend a lot of time on the actual war. So I'm just gonna kind of go through it a little bit with you. Okay, so War of 1812 happens in 1812, starts in 1812. And it is the British versus the United States again. So this is sort of a second American Revolution war here. We're fighting the British again. So the British have joined with the Native Americans, or I should say the Native Americans have joined with the British. They've made a deal with them for guns and ammunition and provisions to help fight against white people who are coming in and taking their land. So, War of 1812. You have two sides at the beginning of this war, two points of view, I should say. One, you have the people who do not want to go to war. They don't feel like it's necessary, don't want to have a war. They think it's going to create a very large debt, which, yes, that's true. Wars are incredibly expensive. So, create a large debt. They're going to need a large army. They're going to need to raise taxes to pay for a really expensive war. Nobody wants to do that. And again, America is going to have to take on the largest army and navy in the entire world for a second time. They feel like the first time we took them on, we got lucky. The second time, we would just be pressing our luck, and it's probably not going to be a great idea. So, have that point of view. Second point of view, we call these guys the war hawks. And they are pro war. They would like to go to war with England. Specifically, we're talking about congressmen from the South and the West, mainly. Very nationalistic. They resented British attacks on America and America's rights that have happened up until this point. And they favor a very aggressive foreign policy. There are two in particular that you need to know, two war hawks that you need to know in particular. One, Henry Clay from Kentucky. If you've ever been to Kentucky, there's a Clay County, Kentucky. That's him, Henry Clay from Kentucky. And then John C. Calhoun from South Carolina. You'll definitely need to know that guy because he comes up a lot in just very shortly. He's going to be super important. So they take it to the floor of the Senate and they vote on whether to go to war or not, because Congress is the only body that can declare war. The president can't do it. He has to ask Congress before he can actually declare war. If the president sends troops without Congress's approval, it is not technically a war. That's how we got into Vietnam. Vietnam's not technically a war. I mean, that's just fun fact here. Vietnam's not technically a war because the Senate never voted on it. Congress never voted on it. So we just call that a skirmish. But for all intents and purposes, it was a war. We just never declared war on Vietnam. Okay, so go to the Senate, vote 79 yes, 49 no. So we're at war with England. The Federalists are opposed to the war. They thought France, not England, was the real enemy here, because we've been arguing with France for a long time now. Rather than fight the British at sea, what we decide to do is focus on Canada. The Canadian border is really poorly guarded, kind of still, but especially at this time. But we thought the French-speaking residents of Canada would join with the British. And so we're trying very hard to stop that before it happens. So we also want to deprive the Native Americans of their primary source of guns, which is through Canada, is where they're bringing them in, through British Canada. So this is our strategy at the beginning of the War of 1812. It fails miserably. This is not a great plan for us. in any stretch of the imagination. Fails miserably. British troops beat back the invasions. They block all of the seaports. It's not great. By the end of, sorry, somebody's coming in. By the end of 1814, the British have attacked and captured most of the North. And by August of 1814, they march on Washington, D.C. and set Washington, D.C. on fire. They burn down Washington, D.C. essentially. They burn the Capitol building. They burn the executive mansion, which is what we called the White House before we call it the White House. So they burned down the executive mansion. They forced James Madison and his wife to flee. And I don't know if I said that. Oh, I think this was on Monday. There's I don't know if you guys have ever seen this, but there is a really fantastic drunk history about this event right here. I love drunk history. I think it's fantastic. It's always historically accurate. Plus it's funny. So bonus, but the drunk history on this particular event, definitely should watch it. It's great. They are forced to flee the executive mansion. When they are leaving, Dolly Madison, the first lady, has the presence of mind to grab a few things before running out of the house. She saves some of the silver. She saves a clock. She also saves the really famous Gilbert Stuart painting of George Washington that still hangs in the White House. The really famous painting of George Washington. She saved that. She handed it to a army private and told him to run, and they ran away with it. So she saved that. Anyway, so they burned down the executive mansion, or they set fire to it. It doesn't burn all the way down. Set fire to it. So this is why at the end of the War of 1812, when the war is over and we're finally starting to build back, instead of taking all of that down, the executive mansion, tearing all that down and rebuilding, what they do is they paint over the burn marks, they paint over the char, and they paint it white to cover all the burn marks on the White House. That's why we call it the White House now, is because after the War of 1812, we have to paint it white to cover up all the burn. So that's how it gets its name. Now it's the White House. And it has to be repainted I think it's every 6 years they repaint the White House just to make sure everything stays covered up and good to go. So, and looks pretty. So, okay. So after they set fire to the White House, they move on to Baltimore and they attack Fort McHenry in Baltimore Harbor. There's a reason I'm telling you about this specific battle. No other battles. This specific battle in particular is important because when they attack the fort in Baltimore Harbor, Fort McHenry, Francis Scott Key happens to be on board one of the ships docked in Baltimore Harbor. Francis Scott Key composes a poem called The Defense of Fort McHenry. And it's super famous. You know it now as the Star Spangled Banner. That's where the Star Spangled Banner was written. It's originally a poem by Francis Scott Key called The Defense of Fort McHenry. It's not set to music until later. And I don't know how, this is so American. We set it to the tune of a British drinking song because everybody already knew it. So yeah, that's how we got our Star Spangled Banner. Okay, so originally it's called Defense of Fort McHenry. And I don't know if you've ever really looked at the lyrics of the Star Spangled Banner, but the first ending line of the first stanza, it's, oh, say, does that Star Spangled Banner yet wave, or the land of the free and the home of the brave? It's a question mark because they don't know if the flag is still standing. They don't know if they're going to survive the night. They don't know if they've just lost the war and America is done. They don't know. He doesn't know. And so it's a question. Is it still there? And of course, over the course of the night, they continue to bombard Fort McHenry, the British do, but the American troops survive the night. And in the morning they wake up and they see the flag is still there They rally and they beat the British. So it's a turning point in the War of 1812. That's why we use it. It's so the very last verse of that poem, the last line is, "And this be our motto, in God our trust, and the star-spangled banner in triumph shall wave over the land of the free and the home of the brave." Exclamation point. It's no longer a question. We've done it. Excited. We're good to go. So, okay. So the end of, it's basically turning point. Skip ahead. Spoiler alert. We win the war. America wins. Okay. So, we go through the Federalists gather, they call it, they gather in Hartford, Connecticut. We call it the Hartford Convention. And they propose constitutional amendments to elect more, to exert more influence over the Union by New England. New England Federalists wanted more say because they felt like if they had more say, this war may not have happened. They probably could have, prevented this war. The other thing the Hartford Convention does, there's a few things that it does, important things. It first repeals the 3/5 compromise. We didn't really get to talk about that because that was last week and we didn't get a chance to discuss that together. But the 3/5 compromise, where each slave counts as 3/5 of a person when figuring out population of a state, the Hartford Convention repeals the 3/5 compromise. So, okay. After the war, the Treaty of Ghent ends the War of 1812. It's signed in Brussels, Ghent, Brussels, and ends the War of 1812. Essentially, nobody gets anything bonus out of the war. We basically agree with England that we each will keep what we already had. We'll just stop fighting, basically, is what's happening here. It is a huge nationalist event for us. We're very proud of ourselves, right? Because we just defeated the British again, which is super impressive. So it leads to this big nationalist movement across the United States. Everybody's very proud to be American again. The other thing is, at the end of the war, this is just an aside, the end of the war, there's another battle of the War of 1812 after we have signed the Treaty of Ghent, the Battle of New Orleans. There's a battle in New Orleans led by a young Army lieutenant, I think at the time, Andrew Jackson is in charge of the Battle of New Orleans. The thing is, news travels incredibly slow in those days. And so he gets ready to go to battle. He thinks the war is still happening. So he fights the battle. Actually, during the Battle of New Orleans, this is the first time really this happens. It's in January of 1815, and we signed the Treaty of Ghent in December of 1814. So technically the war is already over, but Andrew Jackson defeats the British again at the Battle of New Orleans. So he leads a militia of regular troops, militiamen, free Africans and Native Americans. And at one point, even French pirates join in and fight under him. So this weird coalition of all of these people fighting in the Battle of New Orleans. This is the battle that earns him the nickname Old Hickory, because he is very strong-willed and very steadfast. It's a nice way to say that he's incredibly stubborn and hard-headed. So he calls this the rising glory of the American Republic. And he's famous for this battle in New Orleans. He takes this battle all the way with him to the White House. He rides this all the way to the White House. It gets him elected at some point. Okay, so really, the losers of this war are the Native Americans. They had joined with the British and fought against a lot of the Native Americans and joined with the British and fought against the American side. So really the losers in this war are Native Americans. The American government now considers these Native Americans who had fought with the British a conquered people. That's literally what we called them, a conquered people. So it gives us even more justification in their minds. It gives them even more justification to take their stuff, to take their land, to move them out of the country because they lost. They fought against us and they lost, is the way the American government sees this now. It's really sad. Like they needed another excuse, but still, this is it. Okay. I'm going to skip over to the James Monroe because your book talks about the era of good feelings. And that is what we call James Monroe's presidency. He is elected in 1816 and he is elected twice. So 1816 and he's president until 1824. And we call this his presidency the era of good feelings. Because really what happens is he unites two parts of America at this point. He restores, a lot of historians feel like he restores the luster of the presidency. So he throws all these really lavish parties and he's the one who paints the executive mansion white. So that's why we have the White House. And he's basically the bridge between two different centuries. He's between the 18th and 19th centuries. So he's really our bridge. He had fought at the Battle of Trenton, long ago during the American Revolution, had been wounded in that battle. And he wore, like the clothes that he wore were really old fashioned. He still wore those like breeches and silk stockings that you see like in the paintings of the founding fathers. He still wore that stuff. By this time, by 1816, people were just wearing regular pants. There was no need to wear this pantyhose anymore, but he did. He continued to wear that stuff. So a lot of people saw him as old fashioned. However, he was really big on encouraging the country's domestic market. And he was really big on expanding and helping small businesses, farmers, the everyday man sort of situation that Thomas Jefferson had really pushed for. So he sort of is the bridge between the old and the new. His Secretary of State, who you'll need to know for sure, Secretary of State is John Quincy Adams. He's the son of John Adams, who was president already, right? He was our second president. So John Quincy Adams is James Monroe's Secretary of State. He does a lot as Secretary of State. He basically does a few really significant things. One, he sets the northern boundary between the United States and Canada. That it's set at the 47th parallel. I can't remember the number. I think 46th, 47th parallel. So when you look at the top of the United States and it's that line all the way across the top in between Canada and the United States, John Quincy Adams chose that as the boundary, and it's still the boundary, right? He resolved border disputes between the British Canadians and the people who lived right there at the top. The Rush-Bagot Treaty of 1817, that's him. He sets the boundary of the Louisiana Territory. And again, off to the edge of the side there. He normalized relations with Canada. He basically set up a bunch of treaties that normalized our relationship to Canada. And for the most part, we have had peace with Canada ever since. Canada has been an ally and we have really been at peace with them ever since. So, I'd say he did a pretty good job of establishing all those things. He also, the other big thing he wants to do is he wants to get Florida from Spain. He wants to take Florida from Spain. It's down there by itself. We already own the rest of that land. Why not Spain? Why not Spanish Florida too? He wants it. So he gets James Monroe to send Andrew Jackson to Florida to fight the Spanish in Florida. Really what he's doing is he's going down there and he's fighting the Seminole Indians. I don't know if you guys follow sports at all, but you know, the Florida Seminoles. There you go. Okay. Used to be Seminole Indian land. So Andrew Jackson goes down there. He fights the Seminole Indians in a series of battles that last for a few years. And we call them the Seminole Wars. Andrew Jackson fights against them. Initially, he claims to be protecting American citizens from Indian attacks. That's why he's going down there to do this. He captures 2 Spanish forts, really leaving Spain at a weakened bargaining position here. And so rather than risk war, Spain gives Florida to the United States in 1819. And that's John Quincy Adams signs that treaty too, the Adams-Onis, O-N-I-S, the Adams-Onis Treaty in 1819. That's how we get Florida. It becomes part of the United States. So I think this is probably, yeah, okay. Next big topic, the Missouri Compromise. So now we have, in the United States, we have 22 countries, 22 states, 22 states at this point. We have 11 free states and we have 11 slave states. So it's equal right now in the United States in 1820. So the thing is, Missouri wants to join the United States. Missouri wants to be a state. They want to join as a slave state. So the government is not really sure what to do at this point, because if they join as a slave state, then that throws the balance out of whack. Then we'd have more slave states than free states, which means if we have to vote on anything in Congress, the slave states are going to have more pull, more power. They have more votes. So what do we do? So come up with, actually Henry Clay comes up with, the guy, the Warhawk guy from Kentucky, comes up with the Missouri Compromise. So this is what they decide to do. To avert crisis, they work out a compromise. They admit Missouri as a slave state, but then they also admit Maine, way up there in the north. They admit Maine as a free state. Maine wanted to be its own state as well. They just weren't really pushing for it all that hard. Maine used to be part of Massachusetts. And so they split Maine and Massachusetts into 2 separate states. They admit Maine as a free state and Missouri as a slave state. So we still have an equal number of free and slave states in the United States. So that is essentially the Missouri Compromise. We let Missouri come in, but we also admit Maine just to keep everything even. The other big part of the Missouri Compromise is moving that point on for the future. They try to address it in case any other states want to join in. Any state that wants to come in later, if you are below the 3630 line of latitude in the United States, if you're below that, you come in as a slave state. If you're above that line, you come in as a free state. So they're trying to address this ahead of time in case any other states want to come in and join the Union. So above, free, below, slave, the 3630 line. That's basically why we call Maryland is right there on the line. And Maryland is known as the old line state because it's right on that line. So above Maryland, free, below Maryland, slave, essentially, is what that is. Okay. The other thing James Monroe does while he is president that is huge, is he puts out, he issues something called the Monroe Doctrine. The Monroe Doctrine was an address to Congress in 1823 by James Monroe. Basically what it does, it sets out the sentiments basically addressed in Washington's farewell address. He kind of just reiterates those points. Quote, America would not meddle in European affairs, end quote. The thing is, we're not going to meddle in European affairs in Europe. We're not going to Europe to fight a war. We're not coming over there to take your land. However, You cannot also come over here to the United States or the Americas and try to start a war with us. If you mess with any of the countries over here, we will consider that an act of war and we'll retaliate, basically. So Europe, America would not meddle in European affairs, warned Europe that if they intervened in the new Spanish states in America, or French, Canadians, or whatever else, anything in the American colony, American countries, you should know that we would consider that an act of war and will retaliate, basically. It is seen as one of the defining moments in United States foreign policy. It is invoked and used so many times throughout American history. Basically used by, oh my gosh, it's used by so many presidents. Grant uses it, Teddy Roosevelt uses it, John F. Kennedy uses it, Ronald Reagan uses it, invokes the Monroe Doctrine. It basically sets our foreign policy. You don't mess with us, we won't mess with you. That's basically the whole intent here. We basically become the police of the Americas, North and South America. I'm not talking about like America, the country. I'm talking about like America's North and South America, the continents. We basically become the police, the protectors of this half of the continent, of the globe, basically. These continents are under our protection, is basically what it says. So we're basically trying to separate the old world from the new world, is what we're doing here, what he tried to do. And saying that we should stay separate. You stay there, we'll stay here. If we don't mess with that balance, then everything will be good, basically. Okay. I think I'm trying to really think about what to do. I'm going to skip the election of 1824. It's an interesting one. You should definitely look at it. But we really need to talk about Andrew Jackson. So I'm going to skip to Andrew Jackson. The election of 1828 is Andrew Jackson. There's not much difference between Andrew Jackson and the guy he's running against, John Quincy Adams. So at this point, it is basically a popularity contest in 1828. Jackson runs as a famous frontiersman, an Indian fighter. He runs on the Battle of New Orleans. Like, remember, that was me. He served in Tennessee as a judge. He was a self-taught attorney. And so he had also served as a judge in Tennessee and as a congressman in Tennessee. He had also been the governor of Florida after he won it. I don't know if that's the right word, from the Indians, took it, stole it, fought the Indians for it. He became governor of Florida for a minute. So he focused mainly on his domestic policy stuff that he had done, the stuff he had done here in America. He's running against John Quincy Adams. Remember, I just said he was James Monroe's Secretary of State, and he did all that stuff while he was Secretary of State. So most of his experience is foreign policy. So there's a difference there. Adams is very different than Andrew Jackson. He is from New England. He had been a professor at Harvard. He spent lots of time in Europe as a diplomat. Remember, so a lot of foreign policy experience. He played up his traditional Republican ideals, that he was, Republicanism, that what's best for one group of people we should be thinking about what's good for everybody, essentially. And so they run against each other. So you have sort of a New England elite versus a Southern frontiersman, everyman kind of situation. So they run against each other. The election gets really ugly, really ugly. They call each other all kinds of crazy things. It gets that's not a new thing to be really mean to each other during an election. It's happened forever. But at one point, Adams claims that Andrew Jackson is a bigot because he married his wife, Rachel. She had been married before. So he claimed that when they got married, she was still married to her first husband. And so that made him a bigot and like, a bigamist. So all kinds of stuff. I don't know. Anyway. Okay. So all this comes to a head. Andrew Jackson wins. People like the fact that he is just a regular guy. They feel like he could, he really knows where they're coming from, and he would vote based on, he would make policies and law based on what was good for just the common guy, the common man. This is sort of the first election where we vote for the guy we'd most like to have a beer with. That is a poll question that they ask everybody after a presidential election. Like, why did you vote for that guy? And most of the time it's like, he seems like a good dude. I'd like to have a beer with him. Whatever. I don't understand. Okay. So, but this is like the first instance of that. So he wins. During the election, his wife, Rachel, passes away. So she dies before he is actually inaugurated. If you look at the pictures of his inauguration, he is in all black, head to toe. That's because he is in mourning for his wife. It was very sad. But they have a party at the White House for his inauguration. And all these people, these everyday Joes, show up and they storm the White House. There are so many people crammed into the White House that they rip the curtains, they break the chairs, they break all the vases and the pictures on the wall. It gets insane. And they won't leave. Really, the only way they can get these people to leave, this is not a joke, I swear to you, they get these people to leave by rolling a wheel of cheese and barrels of beer onto the lawn of the White House so that the people will follow it outside. That's how they get people to leave. Jackson is not even at this party. He comes in for a second, goes upstairs because he's in mourning, remember? He doesn't really feel like celebrating. So he's not even attending this party. But yeah, people are really excited about Andrew Jackson's presidency when he first gets elected. Really excited about it. Okay. So Andrew Jackson is a interesting dude. Obviously he's from Tennessee. We claim him as a Tennessean, right? And seriously, there's Jackson everything. Old Hickory Boulevard. You can go to the Hermitage, visit his estate at the Hermitage, check all that out. So much stuff. So he's the first president from a Western state. We still consider Tennessee a Western state at that point. He was born in a log cabin. He's not from a prominent family. He is very big on duels. This man participated in over 100 duels in his lifetime, several of them while he's president. He ain't scared, that's for sure. He had a bullet lodged in his chest from a previous duel. And after he survived that duel, he basically felt like he could survive anything. He was not scared, believe me. So he participated in a lot of duels. He was commander of the Tennessee militia. Like I said, he was an attorney, self-taught. He smoked a corncob pipe, chewed tobacco. He was 6 foot tall, but only 140 pounds. So super tall, super lanky dude. This is my favorite quote from Andrew Jackson. When he got elected, this is what he said to the reporters. "I was born for a storm. A calm life never suited me." So he wasn't prepared. Even from a small age, he knew he was destined to do something big and important and great. The thing we need to talk about in the last 5 minutes, give me 5 more minutes. Okay. is Jacksonian democracy. That is a big key term that gets thrown around in American history, Jacksonian democracy. So I'm just going to break it down super basic here. While Jackson is president, they expand voting rights to certain people, for certain people. I'm sure you can guess which groups of people. Yeah. At this time, a lot of states are expanding suffrage. Suffrage is the right to vote, just in case. Okay, so a lot of states are expanding suffrage for white people, but imposing restrictions on African American people. So there is before this, there's a land requirement in order to vote. You have to own a specific amount of land. You have to be a certain age, those sorts of things. In 1821, for example, New York abolishes the land requirement on all whites to vote, but enacted a very large land requirement for African Americans to vote. Although at that time, there are still 300 African Americans who are eligible because they own that much land in New York, and they still got to vote in 1821. So they have to figure out other ways to keep African Americans from voting, which they do pretty quickly. The other thing is, when we talk about the expansion of voting rights under Andrew Jackson, it is true. He does expand suffrage while he's president. So more people in total get to vote. That is true. He does expand suffrage. He expands the amount of people who are eligible to vote. The thing is, it is only a very small part of the population that gets to vote. More of that one group of people get to vote. But African Americans, Native Americans, and women don't get the right to vote. There are some states out west that start giving women the right to vote and African Americans the right to vote. It takes a while, but the Western states slowly start to add that in. But under Andrew Jackson, yes, when they say suffrage expanded under Andrew Jackson, yes, that's true. More people got the right to vote. However, only white people, nobody else, only white people. So there's the hypocrisy of Jacksonian democracy. Oh, I didn't mean to rhyme that. That was good though, right? Okay. I think I'm out of time, but there is some more stuff about Andrew Jackson, specifically his treatment of Native Americans. I urge you to look at his treatment of Native Americans. Under Andrew Jackson, we get the Trail of Tears, where he forcefully moves Native Americans from their land in the north and the south, the eastern part of the country, forcibly moves those people west. And the readings that you have for this chapter are absolutely heartbreaking to read the stories of the survivors of the Trail of Tears, to specifically see they made them walk through the winter along this path all the way out to Oklahoma is where they end up. Basically, it's modern day Oklahoma. And so I don't know if you can imagine walking from Alabama to Oklahoma on foot, carrying all the things that you own or try to take with you, your children and your family and your belongings, trying to get all that stuff all the way to Oklahoma in the winter, not enough food, not enough provisions. It's incredibly heartbreaking and important. It's a historical monument now. You can hike the Trail of Tears if you want to now. Yeah, whatever. Okay. So there's that. Jackson as president, there's a big deal about he institutes the spoil system where he gives all of his friends and family jobs. So a lot of nepotism going on during Jackson's administration. Lots of stuff happening during the Jackson administration. So go through that, take a look at it. There's a reading, the Jill Lepore reading article. It's called His Highness about Andrew Jackson. It's actually pretty good. It's a decent article. And then the movie, The Searchers, that deals specifically with the treatment of Native Americans almost at this time in American history, to give you an idea of that. So trying to think if there's anything really big that we didn't get to cover. I know that there is, and I know that I rushed through that, and I'm sorry. I tried to hit the high points, but definitely go through your chapter and take a look at what's in there, because there's more stuff in there that I didn't get to cover. I will definitely be available to you on Friday. I will open this up and be available to you on Friday if you need anything or have any questions, or, whatever. I'll be here at 9 o'clock on Friday morning. I'll open it up and wait for you if you need me to. Okay, does anybody have any questions for right now? Over anything I covered, or any assignments, or whatever? Anything? Everybody good?
Yep, I'm good.
Okay, thank you for hanging in there. I appreciate it. And have a good rest of your day.
You too.
Thanks.
You
Bye.
too.
Bye.